In this chapter we will analyze position rising after move knight f6. So here white has a couple of options. One is very aggressive move knight g5, which I've played a couple of times and very successfully, but after d5 it takes d5, knight a5, the positions which arise are very complicated and often include a lot of analysis, and they are very hard to explain, sometimes even unclear to very good players. So on knight f6 white can also play d4, but this is also well known to be good for black. That's why I've chosen move d3, which is the most solid move in this position. White idea is again to slowly improve his position, castle, play c3, knight d2, rook e1, knight f1, knight g3, and as we shall see, this is typical in these lines. So on d3 now white is threatening to play knight g5, and here besides bishop c5, black main responses are bishop e7 and h6. In case black plays d6, which is a mistake, again knight g5, attacking pawn on f7, d5 only move, and after e takes d5, knight d5, white has many good options. It's interesting to take knight f7 and then queen f3, but probably the best is just simple knight c3. And this move cannot move because pawn is hanging on f7, so black is already in big problems. Let's go back to knight f6, d3 and h6. The idea of this move is to play d6 and later g6, bishop g7 and castle. The fianchetto idea in this position is often very good for black because it gives him a very solid position, and the ideas are very similar from those from King Indian. So h6, white castles, d6, c3, g6. And now this is a very important moment for white because only one move gives him a chance to obtain advantage, and this is d4. Just to see what would happen if white plays carelessly rook e1, bishop g7, now d4, castle, h3 preventing bishop g4, and now black can take e takes d4, c takes d4, d5, e takes d5, knight d5, and after knight c3, bishop e6, he has a position with isolated queen pawn, and black here is very solid. It's not very clear how white should proceed. So instead of rook e1, d4. Now bishop g7, it's not a good option because white wins a pawn. d takes e5, d5, queen d8, check, knight takes d8 and knight e5. And black cannot take pawn on e4 because then he loses even more material. Rook e1. Now white attacks black knight on e4, and if black takes bishop e5, then rook e4, and the next move is f4, and white wins a piece. Instead of bishop takes e5, black can play bishop f5. In case black moves his knight from e4, then white moves his knight from e5, discovered check, and he's winning material. So bishop f5 and g4, very strong move attacking the bishop. Black has nothing better than to take on e5, g takes f5, now again the knight is hanging, g takes f5 and f3. In case black moves his knight, the bishop on e5 is lost. Black can only give one check more, rook g8, king f1, and now white wins the piece. We can see that bishop g7 is a bad move. Instead, black can try e takes d4, but this is also not a very good move because black gives white a center. c takes d4, bishop g7, knight c3, castle, and after d5 we are in similar position from those which we already analyzed in g6 line. And here h6 is not a very useful move for black. Instead of e takes d4, black also can play knight takes e4, but this is also not a very good move. D takes e5, d takes e5, and now white has a strong move, queen e2, attacking the knight on e4. In case of bishop f5, again g4 wins a piece. Black here will have some compensation for piece, but that wouldn't be enough for him, because white can later just move his king to h1 and start to play normal moves. And if black defends his knight with f5, then knight d2, again attacking this knight on e4. Black must react somehow, and on knight d2. Now white has a fantastic intermediate move, and this is knight e5. Black cannot take white rook on f1 or bishop on c4 because of knight c6. So he must play knight e5, queen takes e5, queen e7. And after queen e7, bishop takes e7, bishop d2, bishop d6, rook e1, king f8, rook d1. White is much better, his pieces are placed on ideal squares, and later he will place his bishop on d4. Black has great problems connecting his rooks, his king is weak, his pawns on the king side are weakened, and this is very difficult position for black. Now on d4 the main move is queen e7. Black defends pawn on e5, and later he will play bishop g7 and castle. White plays knight d2, developing move, bishop g7, rook e1, castle. h3, this is a useful prophylactic move almost in every position with bishop c4, and in case white played knight f1, then bishop g4 already would give a black a good position. Now black has many options. I will start with the most strange move, which is queen d8. This may look like a loss of tempo, but in case white reacts normally with knight f1, then already black will obtain a good position. E takes d4, c takes d4, and d5. Again, he will have a isolated pawn position, and this pawn will always be a motive for black. Later bishop e6, queen d7, rook d8, and rook e8. Instead of knight f1, white has a very strong move, and this is bishop b5. Because black has lost two tempi with his queen from e7 to d8, white can allow himself to play another move with his bishop. And now white is threatening to take on c6 and to take pawn on e5. In case black plays bishop d7, then white simply takes a pawn. Bishop c6, d takes e5, d takes e5, knight e5, bishop e4. Black is trying to use some tactics to return the pawn, but unfortunately for him this is not working. Knight e4, knight e4. In case of queen d1, white just plays knight takes f6, bishop f6, rook d1, bishop e5, and bishop h6, and he's pawn up. And knight takes e4, now knight e4, and here white has a couple of ways to win this pawn. One is knight g6, with the idea of f takes g6, queen b3, and take knight on e4. Another one is bishop takes h6, and after bishop takes h6, rook e4. And the most simple one is to take queen d1, rook queen d8, rook takes d8, rook e4, rook d1, king h2, rook e8, and f4. And now if black plays f6, white has strong move rook d4. And white will have a pawn up after rook d4, because otherwise, in case of rook e1, white just returns his knight to f3 and he's a piece up. So rook d4, c takes d4, f takes e5, and now d takes e5 and white is pawn up. Instead of queen d8, black can also play knight h7 with idea of knight g5, but this is not a very good idea. Knight f1, knight g5, knight takes g5, h g5, d5, knight d8, bishop e3, f5, f3. And now we can see that these double pawns are not helping black to create some attack, because after f4 later he can never play g4. Knight f7, bishop e2. White is going back with his bishop, preventing g4, and also later he wants to play c4, b4 and c5. This is a typical for king's Indian, but here black has no counterplay on the king side. On h3, black's other choices can be king h8. Idea of this move is, in case of knight f1, to take on d4, and after c takes d4, knight e4. And now after knight g3, move f5 is possible to defend this knight. But white is not obliged to play knight f1, and he can play just a4, grabbing the space on the queen side. For example, a5, d5, knight b8 and b4. And his next moves can be knight b3 and bishop e3, or he can return back his bishop to f1 and play knight c4. In all these lines, White's main idea is to play on the queen side, because after d5 he will have a considerable space advantage on the queen side, and black of course needs to play on the king side. So black can also play move rook e8. Now if white plays knight f1, queen d8 makes much more sense than at previous notes, because bishop b5 is no longer possible in case of e takes d4 and pawn on e4 is hanging. And if white plays knight g3, then the same reaction, e takes d4, c takes d4 and d5. And it's even better for black to change one pair of rooks, and I think already black's position is preferable. So knight g3 is not a good option. And it's hard to give white some advice. Probably the best move is d5, and after knight e7, bishop d3, c6, c4, b5. And black has a good counterplay. Let's go back to the starting position after rook e8. And here I want to suggest a little bit untypical move for this line, and this is bishop f1. Idea is for white to push pawns d5, b4, a4, and later knight b3 or knight c4, and possibly even c4, c5. And the rook on e8 is badly placed, especially in the lines after d5, because his square ideal is on f8 to support the f pawn. So now black can play bishop d7, but after d5, knight d8, b4, a5, a4, white already has advantage on the queen side, and this knight on d8 looks very strange, and this bishop on g7 is not doing anything. Knight on f6 also, so white pieces stand much better. So let's go back to the main line. h3, bishop d7, knight f1, rook e8, knight g3. Now white plays useful moves on the king side, and later he will push his pawns on the queen side. Black can play queen d8, or he can play knight h7. Let's see, king h7 is also possible, but now white just simply plays a3 with the idea of b4. He's not in hurry to play move d5, because when he plays d5, the f5 from black will be very effective. So white waits, and after knight g8, b4, a6, bishop e3, white is better. On knight h7, now white can play d5, knight d8, bishop e3, attacking pawn on a7. And white threatens to take this pawn because in case of b6, white simply plays a4 and a5, and his bishop is safe. So black cannot play f5, he needs to play a6, queen d2, attacking pawn on h6, h5, bishop d3. The bishop on c4 is not doing anything, so it's better to have him on the d3 square, where he's defending pawn on d3 and also creating pressure on f5 later. h4, knight f1, f5. And now queen c2. This is a very good move because white creates pressure on f5 pawn, and black cannot play knight f6 or knight f7 to include one of his knights into the game, because pawn on f5 is hanging. And in case of f4, bishop d2, black attack will stop, because after g5, white just plays knight h2 and later f3. In case of g5, white just plays knight h2 and the attack is stopped. And on knight g5, again knight h2 and knight f7, c4. White now creates the queen side offensive with later b4, c5 and rook on c1, possibly on c6 later. So knight f3, b6, b4, knight g5 and queen d1. And later he can take on g5 and play bishop e2 or f3 after he moves his king from the g file. So black cannot find some good way to continue his attack with g-pawn. Knight g3, now we go back to the main move, which is queen d8, d5. Now it's not so good because knight will go on e7. Therefore bishop d3. Knight h7, black wants to play f5, bishop e3, f5. White takes on f5, g takes f5, and now knight h5. And here white is already better because this bishop on g7 will fall, because black cannot play bishop h8 because of bishop c4. Also white threatens to queen b3 and take pawn on b7, and e4 now it's not strong because of bishop c4 check, and later white will move his knight. So this is a typical way for white to deal with this attack, and players with white pieces shouldn't be afraid of these moves, f5, and because later the queen side of black pieces is very weak, and white has many motifs on the queen side. Thank you for watching, and we shall continue later.